Hi everybody, today we're going to learn about parallelograms. So there are some facts about parallelograms that's going to be very important that you know, because as we work on problems with different parallelograms, any type of equation you set up or any statement you make needs to be backed up with a fact. Okay, so it's going to be very important that you know the facts that you can use. So of course, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral, so it must have four sides. That's a given for all quadrilaterals. So another important fact about parallelograms is that opposite sides are parallel. So let's consider this parallelogram below, and let's label it A, B, C, D, and then E. So if it says opposite sides are parallel, that would be AB and DC. So we can say that AB is parallel to DC. And we could also say that BC is parallel to AD. Okay, the next fact is that opposite sides are congruent. So that would be those same pairs, but now instead of parallel, we can also say that they are congruent. So AB is congruent to DC, and BC is congruent to AD, which we can show with our dash marks. The next fact says that the opposite angles are congruent. So if you look at the angles, opposite means across from. So ignoring the diagonals for now, that would mean that angle A and angle C are congruent. They are opposite, so they are congruent in parallelograms. And B and D are also opposite, so they are congruent. Angle D is congruent to angle B. Now this next fact states that diagonals bisect each other. So remember, diagonals are the lines that go across from corner to corner. So this says that the diagonals bisect each other, which means cuts in half. Well, that means that this first part of our diagonal, BE, is going to be equal to the other half. So we can say that BE is congruent to ED. But that's also going to be true about our other diagonal. This diagonal is also going to be bisected or cut in half. So we can say that AE is congruent to EC. All right, our last fact is actually a really useful one. It says that consecutive angles, consecutive just means that they are next to each other. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Supplementary, if you recall, it means that they add up to 180 degrees. So there are a lot of different pairs of consecutive angles here. A and B are consecutive, B and C are consecutive, C and D are consecutive, and D and A are consecutive. Remember, it means next to. So for example, we could make the statement that angle A plus angle B equals 180. They're supplementary, so they add up to 180. We could also say that angle B plus angle C equals 180. So these are the main 6 facts. Well, really facts 2 through 6 are the ones we're going to be using to help us solve for different parts of parallelograms. And for each problem, you will need to state the fact that you're using. So let's give this first one a try. If you look at what we're given and what we're trying to find, you'll notice that we have a pair of opposite angles. Well, luckily, we know the fact that opposite angles are congruent. And by the way, all of the examples that we're doing today, we're going to assume that they are parallelograms. That is a given. So if the opposite angles are congruent, I know that angle R is congruent to angle T. So if angle T is 135, that means that angle R is also 135 degrees. But once again, you do have to have this fact stated. You need to justify your answer. Let's look at this next example. Here you can see that we have a pair of consecutive angles, but we know the fact consecutive angles are supplementary. So this should be no problem to solve. We know that angle C plus angle D should equal 180. They are consecutive angles, so they add up to 180. Angle C is 70. So I can substitute, and then I can finish solving for angle D by subtracting 70 from both sides. And we get angle D is equal to 110 degrees. And once again, we use the fact that consecutive angles are supplementary. All right, in this problem, notice what we are given and what we're trying to find. Here, you'll notice that it's a pair of opposite sides. And luckily, we know that in parallelograms, opposite sides are congruent. So that means that SP is congruent to RQ. If RQ is 23, that means that SP must also be 23 units. And the fact that we use, once again, is that opposite sides are congruent. Okay, let's have a look at this one. Here, this one's a little bit trickier, but you'll notice that we are given two areas where we have consecutive angles. So we are going to use the fact that consecutive angles are supplementary. But notice in this case, we have to add up all three parts and set that equal to 180. So we can say 52 plus x plus 60 equals 180. Here we can combine like terms, so x plus 112 equals 180. And we can finish solving by subtracting 112 from both sides. So that missing angle is going to be 68 degrees. And once again, we use the fact that consecutive angles are supplementary in parallelograms, and these two angles are consecutive. Okay, let's look at this one. Here, you'll notice that we are actually given two diagonals. We are also told that RT is 19.8, and they would like us to find the length of RP, the entire diagonal. So since I see two diagonals that are crossing, I'm going to use the fact that diagonals in parallelograms bisect each other, which means they cut each other in half. Well, that means that RT is congruent to TP, which means that TP must also be 19.8. So to find RP, this entire distance, all I need to do is add up the two smaller segments. 19.8 plus 19.8. So RP is going to be 39.6. And once again, you do need to write your justification that the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. Okay, let's look at this one. Here, once again, we have two diagonals. We also know that UH is 19 and that FH, all the way from here to here, the long segment, is 5x minus 7. So we're going to use that same statement again, that diagonals bisect, and I do need you to write down the statement for every problem. So since the diagonals bisect, I know that HU is congruent to UF. So if this is 19, so is this. This allows me to create an equation to help me solve for x. I know that 19 plus 19 is going to equal my total distance, 5x minus 7. So I'm going to combine like terms on the left, and we should get 38 equals 5x minus 7. Let's add 7 to both sides. 45 equals 5x, and then divide both sides by 5. Our answer is x equals 9. And once again, you do have to include the statement that we know the fact that in parallelograms, the diagonals bisect each other. All right, let's look at this one. Here, they would like us to find the length of line segment RQ. However, in order to do that, we are going to have to find x first. So if you look at what we're given, we are given a pair of opposite sides. So I'm going to make the statement that opposite sides are congruent. That statement allows me to make the equation that -1 plus 4x equals 3x plus 3. So I'm going to start by subtracting 3x from both sides, and then add 1 to both sides, and I get x equals 4. However, remember, our instructions were to find the length of RQ. Well, I know that RQ is 3x plus 3, so I can substitute x with 4, and I can find the length of RQ. So RQ is just 12 plus 3, which is 15. So always make sure you answer what's being asked. And remember, you do need to make the statement that opposite sides are congruent. That's the only way we were allowed to create this equation. It has to be mathematically sound. All right, let's give this one a try. Here they would like us to find the measure of angle G, but in order to do that, we're going to have to find x first. So I notice that we are given a pair of opposite angles, and we know that opposite angles in parallelograms are congruent. So that statement allows us to say that 5x minus 9 equals 3x plus 11. We cannot make that equation until we have stated this fact. Now from here we can solve. I'll subtract 3x from both sides. I will add 9 to both sides. And we can divide both sides by 2. So we get x equals 10. But once again, we weren't asked to find x. We were asked to find angle G. We are shown in the figure that angle G is 5 times x minus 9. So we can substitute for x. And 50 minus 9 is 41. So 41 degrees. But of course, it all starts with the fact that opposite angles are congruent in parallelograms. Okay, last example. Here, we are told that TE is 4 plus 2x. We are told that EV is 4x minus 4, and they would like us to find TE. So once again, I see that we have a pair of diagonals that are intersecting. So I'm going to use the fact that diagonals bisect each other in parallelograms. And that allows us to state that VE is congruent to ET. So once again, we have to make this fact before we can create our equation. But now that we know this fact, we can create the equation that 4x minus 4 equals 4 plus 2x. So here I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. I'm going to add 4 to both sides and divide by 2 on both sides. So we get x equals 4. But once again, we weren't asked to find x. We were asked to find TE. We were told that TE is 4 plus 2x. So all we have to do is a little bit of substitution for x. And we get TE equals 12. All right, that is all for today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching.